Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. Again. That's right. It's 2 Arsecasts in one day. That might sound like a crowded house song, but in fact, it's the reality in which you exist right now. This is a special kind of an episode because it's always a pleasure and a privilege to have the opportunity to talk to a former Arsenal player, and not just any old player either, a club legend, a double winner in 97-98, a double winner in 2001-2002, and of course a member of the Invincibles, as well as winning the FA Cup in 2002-2003, Arsenal Player of the Season in the 1995-96 campaign, a total of 449 appearances for the club, and he's got a brand new book out right now. It's called On the Edge. If you stick with us, you can win one of 2 signed copies. So hang on until the end. We'll have a quiz question for you. You can enter the competition to win a signed copy of On the Edge. And it is my pleasure to welcome to the Arsecast, Martin Keown.
Very good, Andrew. Pronunciation.
Yes.
You did well there. Keown, I've been called Keown for years, but if you read the book, John Motson made me say Keown when it should have been Keown. So yes. Anyway, the Irish can say it, but the English have a trouble.
Well, we have a very similar sort of background, even if you're a couple of years older than I am. But I was born in England to Irish parents.
Wow.
In the 70s. Which I think goes some way to explain why I became an Arsenal fan at that time, yes. because of all the Irish players. I was absolutely fascinated. I know we're sort of going to jump around a little bit here, but I was fascinated by what your dad said to you at one point about he came to England, he enjoyed the benefits of the country, and he said to you, "You're English." This is when you were deciding about, well, not deciding, but when your international career was for discussion, and my father would have been completely the opposite. He would never have said you're English, but it is a sort of quirk of the football world at that time that you represented England at a very young age and therefore couldn't change.
I think my father was ahead of the curve, and it was quite magnanimous of him, really, because the Irish, there's no one that pine for home like the Irish. Yeah. There's no one who talks about so fondly of their homestead than the Irish. So, although maybe there are the other people out there who claim just to be as, home sweet home is the same for everyone. But my dad was like, it was quite a big message, really. And it's something I've actually shared with other people that arrive in England and don't really see themselves as English. Maybe in America, it's a lot more open, America, everyone's like, suddenly they become American when they arrive there. Maybe there's something good about that. And the English can be a bit, you're a blow-in, and you have to take time to be accepted.
Sure. And
so, but you have to want to feel part of the place as well. And so my father helped me to feel that way. Although growing up in England, around those problems with the IRA bombings, and we saw those real things happening, didn't we? We were coming in for a lot of stick and discrimination from local people. We had a small supermarket come off license. People started to boycott that. Yeah. And I was very much known as an Irish so-and-so within the area. So not English.
No, it's
not English.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was in school in England till 10, when we moved back to Ireland, I was Irish in school in England. The minute I went back to Ireland, I was a Brit for a while, until you lose the accent.
Yeah, you're kind of a plastic paddy, aren't you, when you arrive in Ireland, and they don't see you as one of theirs.
Yeah,
the English don't certainly see you as. We had that name up on the front of the shop, Keown. It was advertising where we were from.
Sure.
So that made it difficult for people to kind of accept us in. But that's where kind of my character is being built, and standing up for myself and not being, allowing people to try to bully me. And my father, as young kids, guys, you need to get your fists up and protect yourself. Maybe went a bit too far in that direction, but there were issues. There were a lot of issues growing up. And in the football world, you have to look after yourself as well. It's a ruthless business.
Sure.
Culling exercise of trying to get into the top level. It's dog-eat-dog situation. You've got to be the best. But then you've got to become a team player. At one stage, you're treading on everybody to get where you need to. But then you need everybody to be successful in a team of 11. So it's a change of mindset once you get to the professional level.
I mean, that was what struck me when you talked about that, when you talked about those formative experiences and you know, the challenges, let's say, of being an Irish family in England at that time, where there was a level of confrontation, let's say, from an early age. And it, you know, having read the book, it's a sort of a running theme through the book with you, which is part of your character, which is what made you such a great player. But those confrontations, whether it's about not being, as you said a bit earlier, not being bullied, or about standing up for what you think is right, or standing up for what you think is the best way to do things on the pitch and off the pitch. Like, you know, the idea that there are maybe, let's say there are two sides to a person. There's the guy that's on the pitch and the guy that's off the pitch. Is there somewhere in the middle as well, where there's the guy that's on the pitch, there's the guy that's off the pitch, but even when you're not necessarily on the pitch, there's still a part of that in your character when you're dealing with the sort of the rigors of professional football, you know, from contracts and transfers and injuries and physio, all those kinds of things?
Well, if we look at, you know, I had a set of principles that I tried to adhere to. I talk about what my father said about, you know, where I belong, but in terms of when I went to live in London, I was sent there with a clear message of not to, you know, pee my money up against the wall, which, you know, don't be a drinker, son. Don't discuss religion. Don't gamble. Don't play cards. You know, like it was kind of a surreal conversation, thinking, why do I need to know this? But really within a few weeks of being at the club, I realised I needed to know all of it. And I tried to tread a certain path. And really the principles of what I was about kind of, you might have said, got in the way a little bit. But if I was to say to you, you know, like I'm fighting for my livelihood, I'm fighting for my standard of living, and I will sit in a boardroom to do a contract, and I'll fight just as hard as I do on the pitch. I don't separate the two. And probably I got a bit too emotional around that negotiations with George Graham at the beginning. But I felt that I'd seen a lot of good men, you know, tried and failed to make it at Arsenal. But there I was, sticking to the criteria, being in the first team, playing all these games, 23 on the bounce, and only being offered a £50 a week rise. Now, in footballing terms, that is not a great deal of money. So I just felt, okay, then, I'm going to decide now, not you. I'll decide my future. So I stepped off.
How old were you at that point? 19, 20?
19, and it's like, what makes it about a 19-year-old that does that? And what, you know, it's kind of like, also the first thing we talked about was not my money that I was earning. It was talking about what I saw as a lack of professionalism, the likes of Charlie Nicholas, you know, getting changed into his leathers on the way back from Old Trafford for us to detour through the West End so he could be dropped off, so he could join the nightlife. And I thought, hold on a minute, this is unprofessional. So I knew right from wrong from a very young age. And that's what we discussed with George Graham. And then, oh, by the way, Martin, your contract, here you go, £50. No, sorry. You know, I'm here we want to make the club, you know, be successful, but now you need to talk about me. We had no time to talk about me at all. George had to rush off. He was going on holiday with his wife. He just arrived at the club. So I leapt, but I didn't look really where I was leaping. And I ended up at Aston Villa. So that, you know, watching all these guys, this youth team that I played in, you know, the club doesn't really celebrate. And not that I want to be celebrated,
sure,
but the group that came out of that 83 group was quite astonishing. 6 players went to play full international football, 8 in the first team. And, you know, I was like, right, okay, I'm off. And I waved goodbye to, you know, what was a lot of good players. I thought every club was stocked with youth teams with that sort of group. But when I got to Villa, that wasn't the case.
I mean, just to put it in context again, you're 19. I think players these days have a lot of advisors. They've got family members around them even, or they've got agents who are looking after all of this kind of stuff for them. But this was sort of you going to bat for yourself. And it is, when you're that age, when you're coming up against authority, which George Graham had at Arsenal Football Club, and you're also trying to balance the opportunity that you know you have at this amazing club, which you love, that must be really difficult to then sort of say, I could be causing myself a problem here. It might backfire on me, but I believe that what I'm about to say is the right thing to say, and I'm adhering to my principles. But maybe if I just don't say anything and just take the £50, and then, I get these chances in the first team, and then I can sort it out a bit later on. Like, I think there would be a lot of 19-year-olds, and I probably would have been among them, who would not have been happy necessarily with that situation, but in order maybe not to jeopardize the chance, wouldn't have said anything.
No, but this was my sort of third contract that I was about to sign for the club. I was in competition with Tony Adams as well, the two of us. Really, the sensible thing to do was to sat us both down and say, look, you two are going to be the future of the club. You're already ahead of the curve. Tony was in the team at 17. I was in at 19. When I left, we'd played the same number of games. We were playing the last 3 or 4 matches together with O'Leary with us. Mm-hmm. So, that would have been the sensible thing to do. But I just felt, look, guys, it's been a difficult journey for me. I've now proved to you what I can do. And now someone else is going to benefit from my services. I have to be as ruthless as you are. You've sent a lot of guys out the door here telling them I'm not good enough. I'm telling you I am good enough. I'm good enough. I've met the criteria. I've ticked all the boxes. I'm off. I don't think they expected that. Ken Fryer, when he opened this, this ledger, huge, great big ledger, and Arsenal in the red, didn't expect me to turn around and say, no, don't pay me any money. I don't want my beloved Arsenal to be in debt. He didn't expect that. So I was thinking a little bbit differently. I mentioned this all to Tony. We sit down, and you'll hear that in the audio, the actual meeting of me and Tony, and he talks about my principles. He wished he had principles because he didn't. And I sort of stood up to it. But the thing was, at least I get a second chance. I get to come back to relive it all. It's unfinished business, and it's not a smooth journey on the way back. It's never going to be when you turned your back on the club, because that's how some fans would have seen it. But once it came good for me, it tasted, it counts for double for me, sure, in a way. When you go and have that kind of success to come back, it was really sweet in the end.
I mean, let's talk about that then. You went to Aston Villa. There's you explain a scenario in the book where Doug Ellis, who is the Aston Villa chairman, at one point, I think you're sitting in the back of the car, and he says, well, I paid more for Martin than I really wanted to. And again, you're a really young man, and you're finding your way in the game, and self-belief and talent are unquestionable, but there is something to deal with when the chairman of the football club that you've gone to has basically said, I don't think you're worth as much as I paid for you. Some might say that's like a psychological thing. I'll prove this guy wrong. The way you tell it, I'm not necessarily sure that's what he was getting at. It was just, an off-the-cuff remark and not a nice thing to say. We'll talk about Everton as well, where you've gone there and maybe the support you need as a young player to develop and to grow in the best possible way isn't there from some of your more senior teammates. How did you view those challenges, from Doug Ellis, from players at Everton like Kevin Ratcliffe, who looked at you and didn't necessarily try and help you in the way that you might expect?
Disdainful is the word you report.
That could be the word.
Disdainfully, yeah. Let's start with, to keep it in order, so Doug Ellis. So I was sat in the back of that car, and Doug had gone too far. I mean, Arsenal were looking for £500,000 for me, at that time. £500,000 was a lot of money, but the wages just didn't stack up. And again, that was something in the book that I really wanted to underline, because it was kind of made to look as if I was pushed. But no, I jumped. I didn't, Arsenal wanted to keep me, but they couldn't get that figure for a reason. They couldn't get or convince the tribunal to pay that money, because the wages they'd offered me was so low that the fee was set for £125,000. And every time I played 50 games, it would rise to 200 grand. And that's how it was set out. So I thought Aston Villa actually had got a hell of a deal for me, a hell of a deal. So I thought it was really disrespectful from Doug Ellis, and I just thought, I need to tell him. Now, we joked about that many times in the future, about how I reminded him, and he would say to me, I never put this in the book because I didn't want to, that I was the best signing he ever made, value for money signing he ever made. But I wanted to prove that, and I knew he'd made a mistake in that comment. But I also knew the pressure that the manager was under. And he was sacked within 6 matches. Graham Turner was sacked. I arrived there. The pre-season for me was really poor. We were hardly running. We were just jogging, no intensity, no real direction. I went to see the assistant manager. Again, I'm still 19 years of age. Went to see the assistant manager to say, look, hold on, what are we doing here? We're going to get relegated. I was the first person who mentioned the word relegated, and that's what happened. It was far too good a group to go down. It was stocked with really quality players. Tony DeRigos went on to play for England, Mark Walters, Paul Elliott. You had an ageing Andy Gray there, but could still have offered something. Nigel Spinks, European Cup winner. There was some, Alan Evans. There were good players in there, so it was a travesty that we got relegated. But if you're not right and you take liberties, you're not successful. And I could smell it a mile off. But the thing was, what made me a bit unpopular was actually mentioning it before everyone else. Although, to be honest, I enjoyed my time at Villa. And when Graham came in, Graham Taylor rescued that football club. It was on a slippery slide. He said to me afterwards that 3 divisions if he hadn't gone there. He was an incredibly successful type personality. His first meeting with the players was really impactful, probably the most impactful of any manager that I came across, and he turned that football club around.
The picture you paint of professional football at that time is night and day, obviously, from where we are today, and the kind of environments in which players work and train and grow, and in particular young players, where there are things that you were asked to do and your peers were asked to do as young players, as trainees and apprentices, that no young player is ever going to be asked to do these days. What do you make of the more modern outlook on that, the more holistic approach to developing players? Is there something in the come up hard and it kind of teaches you life lessons and teaches you how to be on the pitch? Or are maybe the methods today more conducive to getting the best out of a young footballer? Sure, you don't have that hardship, but what you do have is a more rounded approach to coaching, to life, to dealing with the pressures of the job.
Yeah, but I think that you can, if you're not careful, lose out on some of the skill set that the player needs. Because like Don Howe used to say to me, we used to do duties. So someone would do the passageway, someone would do the home dressing room, someone would do the aways, and someone would, I'm listening to you, and someone would do the gaffer's office and the medical room. There's 4 sets of duty that we'd all do. There'd be 4 first-year apprentices and 4 second. And every Friday we'd arrive back at the ground, we'd train at the ground, and we would do those duties. We would clean the floors, we would polish the dressing rooms. And in doing so, that we were building a sort of an affinity with what is to be our second home in the future. So playing at Highbury held no fears for me, because it was I spent many an hour there, respectfully cleaning. We would go onto the pitch. We would, the ground staff needed us. We had to repair the pitch. We'd be in the terraces looking out from, okay, they can't even see us from the back end of the East Stand. That's interesting. Clearing out litter or whatever it was. We would do these extra jobs. And Don Howe used to say, well, look, if I can't ask you to go and clean the bath or the dressing room floor, and you do it properly, how can I ask you to mark the best player in the opposing team from set pieces? If I can't give you can't carry out, a small task in the dressing room.
Sure.
So everything was sort of linked to carrying out the job properly. We moved house for Steve Birkinshaw. I put that in the book. Steve, bless him, was a great man. He brought, he was in charge of recruitment for this incredible youth team. We moved house for him. I didn't know he had a piano that we had to take over the back wall, but we did. He even had a model aircraft in the roof, in the attic. I don't know how he got it through that. I mean, everything went through this small piece.
Sure.
But we got, what did we get? 20 quid, a £5 each for doing it. We weren't allowed to go home. We had to stay there for 3 days extra. But these were all on the list of things to do.
Sure.
Guys, you thought you were going home. You're not. I'm moving house, and you're going to do it for me. So it was endless. Cleaning the manager's car. But looking back, they were good days.
Yeah.
Funny, great to be around. Everyone would want to do the away dressing room because you got a chance to go in and see, maybe if Liverpool or Man United were in town, you go in and see some of the players. It'd be a right mess, the away team dressing room. Some of the clubs left it, but Liverpool always left it tidy and nicely. You kind of judge the opponent by the way they left the away team dressing room.
Okay.
I'm remembering all this now.
I won't ask you how Tottenham left the away team dressing room.
No, we didn't want to go in that day.
No, I'm sure. But look, after Villa, you went to Everton, and then, there were other clubs interested in you at that time. I know you talk about Manchester United being a club that was interested in you. This was between, I think, Villa and Everton. But
what did you say there, Andrew?
Sorry, I was saying Manchester United were a club that were interested in you.
Probably needs to be repeated, yeah. They were interested in me more than once.
Yeah.
And they wanted to take me when Aston Villa were relegated, and Graham Taylor wouldn't let them. He told me that if we don't get promoted in that second season at Villa, because we were in the Championship, that I would be going to Manchester United. We stayed, we went up, so that didn't happen. And at the end of that season, I had talks with Sir Alex Ferguson, but just felt that he was giving me all the wrong answers as to why I shouldn't go there. There was a huge disparity between their contractual offer and Everton's, and I wanted to make it less about money and more about performance. And I didn't hear what I wanted to hear.
Sure.
So I don't have any regrets. And obviously they became my sort of fiercest rivals, Manchester United. They went on to what he did there was incredible. But that same week I had talks with Brian Clough, and probably the most charismatic manager, light years ahead of Ferguson at that point. Obviously Ferguson goes on to be this incredible leader and was still a very young man at the time, so hard to compare. But Clough was just incredible. He gave my wife to be, because I was getting married at the end of that week, he gave her chocolates and a crystal vase, and then when he knew I wasn't going there, he asked for it all back again in true Cloughy style. So that was 3.5 hours he locked me in his office for. So that was a talking point that we got.
Sure. And the Everton approach, is the one that you went for in the end, and you had good years at Everton. But again, we sort of come back to this idea of, you being a young player and some senior players. I mean, even there's a bit later in the book, I think it's in the conversation that you have with Tony Adams.
Yeah.
Where Kevin Ratcliffe at Everton, he was the captain, he was a central defender, you're a young guy coming through, and you would think for the benefit of the team, it behooves everybody to sort of help everybody along because you've got a better chance of getting results. But in the conversation you have with Tony, there's a bit with, I think it's about Steve Bold, and he says, "Oh, we're not going to be mates because you're here to nick my place." And I'm just so fascinated by that dynamic, because we look at a football team, we look at a dressing room, maybe we look at the work that Mikel Arteta has done to bring his team and this group of players together. And on the outside, we like to think all these guys are great friends. They're all out for each other. They'll back, and on the pitch, yeah, you're going to back each other up in that. But there is this edge, isn't there? This competitive edge within a football dressing room where if you see a guy come in who's maybe going to take your place, there is that there between players, and that can play out in different ways, obviously.
Yeah, and you have to handle that as professionally as you can. You have to feel that the manager is giving you it's a fair contest, and that there's an element of belief from the manager in you to be able to do that, to be able to play. But you have to remember that the Arsenal back four had achieved a lot of great things before I came in there. So it wasn't going to be an easy task to break that up. And although O'Leary was sort of filling in, getting plenty of appearances, it was mostly this back four. And Andy Linegan, of course, had done a decent job himself. So to break that up wasn't going to be easy. So I knew that wasn't going to be a walkover. And obviously Steve Bold's a proud man, and rightly so for what he achieved. So, but somebody had to break that up. Oliver Holt did an interesting story in the serialization of the book where he talks about the back four and the photograph that was taken in 97, 98. That disappointed me, because I think aficionados will, Boldy did a lot of games, might have even played more games because I broke my shoulder playing for England that year, but I was very much in the back four for that season, for those successes. And poor David Seaman as well, never gets, it's not just the back four, is it?
Yeah.
You defend as a team. But nonetheless, they were, their unity and the strength of that was the back four. Tony says it's the best group he's played with. He's given them that. But that means, my 449 games were in there somewhere, and I think the book we're trying to fight for that a little bit. Sure. I think the fans know that I played my part, but as I say, that was disappointing. I wasn't sort of, I wouldn't have said welcomed in, because it was like, I'm here whether you like it or not, and we're all pulling in the same direction. You can get it. Don't worry about that. I think it's changed a bit now. It's become more collective. Much they're playing 20 games a season, maybe more than on average than we were. So you can share it around a little bit as they did last night.
When you returned to Arsenal, I mean, there were some issues with the medical, and you were carrying an injury at the time, and injuries obviously have punctuated your career for periods. But when you returned, having made that decision to walk away. When you came back, were you more determined to make it work, to be a success? Do you think that the experiences you had at Villa, at Everton, and also sort of just having to deal with the off-field things of moving clubs, and were you in a better place? Did those stand you in good stead to come back into an Arsenal team, an Arsenal squad at that time, which was very competitive?
Andrew, when I came back, Highbury was almost as it was when I left. There was early development taking place for the North Stand. It was becoming all-seater. But everybody, all the people of the staff, everyone around it, Arsenal was quite big on the outside but small on the inside. There was a real warmth, and it was still in position when I came back. And the mystique and nostalgia of Highbury and the Marble Halls, everything was there. It was a lovely dream to come back to, But the reality was, I'd been away 7 years. A lot of things had been won. The people I was sharing the dressing room with now, that were youth team players with me, were very different and were on a pedestal. I didn't necessarily like the people that were in front of me. They were different people. But by the time we finished there together, the likes of Tony and Paul Merson pretty well came back to the people I remember. And, that was a relief for me. And by the end of my career there, it was everything was just perfectly positioned. Great people coming into the building. I feel that's in place now, actually. I feel that with the manager, the way that he leads his life, Edu. These are good people. I think it's a good starting point. Proper people. You don't win anything without intelligent, good, honest individuals. And I think they're stacked with it now. It was as it was then. And Arsene Wenger sort of worked really hard to put that. He unravelled the coil. Ability that was always under the surface, and he got it out with me. So it demonstrates to me that it's a kind of a shared relationship between the players and the management. When you didn't play well, Wenger took that personally. He blamed himself. I didn't see that too many times during my career. So, coming back and Wenger arriving, it was tricky with George. I think George had run his course a little bit, the way his style of management. I do feel, though, that our personalities were all shaped by George. The way that we were, that intensity. I was a bit too clashy with him. I took it a bit personally, didn't handle him that well. I've told him that. But that was just me. I would handle it a lot more differently today. If I was there from the beginning, I'd have probably thought, this is just a George Graham act. This is his team talk. Because I tried to reenact it in the audio to try to take George off. Apologies for that. But I'm trying to do it without fear. As Arsene Wenger said, do everything without fear. So you'll find there's a few voices on the audio that you... And if you listen to the dressing room, you were in that dressing room, I'm hoping to take you back to capture that dressing room and how George spoke to everybody, because I was astonished when I first went back. But that was an every match occurrence to listen to George at halftime.
I mean, one thing you mentioned in the book that had never really occurred to me around the George Graham time was, when he lost his job with regards to the bungs on the transfers, and everybody from the outside can say, okay, that's not the way to do things. But what didn't occur to me was, the impact it might have on you guys as players, looking at it from the financial point of view. Not obviously, if your manager's caught up in that, it's obviously not a good situation. But on the one hand, being told there's no money for contracts or raises or anything like that. But then the manager is earning more from areas that he shouldn't be earning it from, in terms of keeping a dressing room harmonious and undivided, that's obviously an issue.
Well, I tried to balance that up because that's what I was hearing. Some people were like, well, hold on, every time we go in for a pay rise, he's telling us there's no money available. And, he looks like he's putting his hand in the till himself, So, but at the end of the day, the others were thinking, well, maybe he's not getting paid enough money either. He's in the same boat as us. So let's not blame him for that.
Sure.
From my point of view, he made me a little bit of the personality I was. And toughened me up, would say to me, you're too effing nice, yeah? Well, I had to then show some of that strength when he was being shown the door. There were one or two players were quite emotional. I wasn't one of them. I kind of realised this is tough on George. I didn't think it needed to end that way. It's a shame it ended that way because he was one of Arsenal's most ever successful managers, and what he inherited when he came in, he took full advantage of that. I know I was a little bit of a victim, but he brought me back. So I'll always be eternally grateful to George. In fact, George, at my testimonial dinner, I invited him along. I didn't realise I was going to get a bit of a rollicking, suggesting that if I'd have listened, I'd have been the most decorated player that ever played for Arsenal, played the most games for Arsenal, and we'd all be still talking about him in even more glowing terms. But I didn't bring him in to tell me that. But I suppose that was typical George. And whether that would have worked or not, we never know because I left. It was hard enough for the 2.5 years for us to strike up a balance. He probably didn't get the best out of me, although he got some good performances out of me. Mostly in Europe, they would give me some reconnaissance mission to mark somebody. And George was so detailed. They're winning that Cup Winners' Cup was no fluke, let me tell you.
No.
That was hard fought. I missed that final through injury. I played in the 9 of the 10 games before the final to get there, and then ended up getting injured. So under George, it wouldn't happen for whatever reason. We nearly got there in that way. He was trying to get me to play in that final, but I pulled my hamstring just 5 days before, so I had to step away.
Did you enjoy that? Did you enjoy the man marking? Did you enjoy that as a job to do? Because it's not an easy job to do.
Well, no, I came there to break into the back four. So when I'm when I was asked to man mark, I saw that almost as a step backwards. But when I look back, really, I was pretty good at it. I tried to explain that in the book. I tried to explain that it was something that I should have embraced more. The game against Auxerre when Ian Wright scores that incredible goal for us. I went on this, this journey following. I think the guy Martinez was his name. I think Arsenal tried to sign him, but he got an injury. He would have been an all-time great as far as I was concerned. He was one of the best players I played against. But I stopped him from really creating anything, and that was something I was capable of doing.
So let's fast forward a bit to Arsene Wenger, and I think you've credited him with maybe getting more out of you than other managers, that he saw more in you as a player than other managers. How keen were you to sort of embrace his methods and his styles of play? And, was there ever a period where you're thinking, okay, I'm going to have to sort of change the way I play here? Or did you always feel confident in your own ability that you could do what Wenger wanted his players to do?
Wenger did something really very clever that no other manager had done that I'd worked under before. What he did was he basically put a wall chart up on the board, oldest player to youngest, with a 15-minute meeting for each player. It was a few weeks before I got to him because the meetings took quite a bit longer than 15 minutes. I think it started with Andy Linegan, who was the oldest player. And when I sat down in the meeting, he said, look, we'll keep this short. I've watched you for the last 18 months. I've seen every game. You play for me as you played in those games, and you play every week. And by the way, on your way out, I need you to go and see David Dean. We're not paying you enough money, and you need a new contract.
Okay.
So that was, how much more reassurance do I need?
Not much.
So, belief, trust, and care, all in one meeting. Never really did I encounter that before.
Yeah.
So I think I skipped out of the room. It took a while to get hold of David Dean, as usual, like getting blood out of a stone. But eventually we signed a new contract. So, yeah, I mean, he was emphatic in his belief for me and trust. So that was the basis of his management. He kept it simple. Didn't over. We didn't need to spend hours talking. We just needed, there was no time to lose. We had to get to the training ground. He did things with his training. Do you know, it's like, I was talking to someone earlier today, and it was like, because the guys who were there before me had won things in a very dictatorial way with George Graham. We're kind of like, well, this guy does it in a different way. We're not really sure what he does. But for me, it meant everything because it gave me the trust. He empowered me to go and do it for myself. And then he was like, okay, I'm just going to take over with the ball, without the ball, no restrictions. I trust in you. You go, Martin, and you go and win. Go and win something for me.
Sure.
Simple.
His methods, you have a conversation with Arsene in the book as well. And he says something which I really like. When he talks about keeping players happy, he said, I needed you all to be happy because the game is happiness. When you go to school, you finish the day or it's break time, you play with your friends. You're happy because it's the opposite of boring. The game is to express yourself. And once it becomes only a job, you lose the ability to express yourself, which I think in the modern climate is absolutely fascinating to think about, because so much is structured, so much is coached, so much is organized, so much is about discipline, so much is about carrying out these tactical instructions. And I'm not saying there was none of that with Arsene Wenger, clearly not, but there was an element of and people have talked about this often before, where let the players go out, let them express themselves, let them show their talent. You know, was that something you say in the book that it was the happiest time of your career? There was fun and happiness when you were playing for Arsene Wenger. And I think obviously part of that is that his methods were also very successful. You won things. You were part of title-winning teams, double-winning teams. So how do you view that desire of Wenger back then to make you guys happy in order to get the best out of you in the context of where we are in football today, which could feel maybe a little prescribed for some people?
Well, he let me be me, first of all, and be myself. And there was happiness, fun, joy. He created a mood, and then within the mood, that affects your behaviour, doesn't it? That's how you behave. To give you some idea of this, so we'd be on the bus on the way, mirandering through the Victorian, semi-detached houses on our way to Highbury, as those great days, and the fans were at the foot of the steps as we come in. And as we mirandered through the streets, it would be, the music's playing simply the best. Tina Turner, full volume. And we're all on there, singing it out loud, and every one of us feeling that, like an uncorked bottle as we got off the bus, ready to do battle with whoever it was. Didn't matter, we could go to war, you name it, this team was capable of anything. And all of that was being developed on the coach, simply changing the mood, making us feel that we could, beat anybody.
Sure.
And I quickly can take myself back in my mind's eye to that bus, the feeling of characters around you, lots of comedians on the bus, Ray Parlour, Ian Wright. Ian was like Eddie Murphy. He was so funny. He was a natural, whatever he was going to do. I like to have a laugh and a joke and keep it going. Dennis Bergkamp would surprise you as being he was fantastic company, Dennis, great mind, perfectionist as he was. So many great people, but Wenger, he was in charge of that. He pressed the button for that music whenever we came round that corner. He was ready for timing. It was him. We were all dancing to his tune. He wasn't just doing, people look back and say, what did he do? He did everything. He did everything and nothing when he needed to. And if he didn't know what to do, he'd say to me, if I don't know what to do, Martin, I won't do anything. I'll wait. That's how he lived his life. And it just, for me, it worked. It worked. It was the way, okay, I'll take ownership. Boss, I'll step in. I'll deal with it. You're telling me to be myself. So that was life changing for me, and I really like that style of working. That, you know, a lot of trust, and you got if you're going to hand it over and you're going to empower people, you've got to give them the tools, let them manage, take over from you. You know.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you as well. You know, you were at the sort of vanguard of a change in the Premier League, which was for the most part English, British players in the initial stages, but then as Arsene Wenger came in, the influence of foreign coaches, because Wenger was one of the first foreign coaches, people forget that, you know, and signings from abroad, people coming in like Patrick Vieira, like Thierry Henry, like Dennis Bergkamp, where all of a sudden you have this combination of, I guess what you might call the traditional British players and British style, but then with this added continental flair, and that was obviously a big part of Arsenal's success under Arsene Wenger. What was that like to be part of, to sort of have these two? No, I mean, I'm not saying every European culture is the same, but to sort of assimilate these two different worlds of football, if I can call it British or English, mixed with continental, for want of a better word, where you have the flair, perhaps a greater view on professionalism, looking after yourself, looking after your diet, your body, those kinds of things. I mean, was that a big part of why, for example, you played as long as you did?
Well, I was always an advocate of fitness, and, you know, that didn't just start with Arsene Wenger.
Sure.
Although, you know, he had what I called a body doctor that came in, a guy called Philip Boxall. He was a chiropractor that said I'd have played to 40 if he'd have got me at 19, because I had back issues. You know, we talked about that, or we didn't, but the Everton chapter, where I had a chronic back injury for 3 years. You know, I was playing for England and I couldn't bend down. You know, so and miraculously that all kind of went away by changing my bed and changing my car in my early Arsenal days. But to be a part of all this change was liberating. There was no doubt. Wenger was the first successful foreign manager, really. There was a resistance to him. I don't think he was particularly well liked by sort of Ferguson's followers, should we call it, where he kind of had everybody bringing in bottles of wine before games, and there was no way Wenger was going to do that. So he kind of, and I liked that. I did, you know, the less English players that were around, I suddenly got back into the England team. You know, I'd watched from afar, seeing people. I don't want to be disrespectful, but I'm being honest, which is what this book's about. I thought there were players that I was better than that were getting into the England team in my position. But once people looked at me and all these foreign players coming in, and I was an English player still surviving, still playing, and thriving, I got back into the England squad. And there were a lot less English players around at that time. The numbers were dropping. And I became more obvious as a player to pick. So that I found that very interesting. But no, Wenger was a joy. And I think probably people were thinking, who's this very smart so-and-so coming in? Manchester United, Ferguson would have been like, okay, who does he think he is, this foreign guy coming in here? Yeah. So he was on the outside. And I liked outsiders, having been an outsider myself for large parts of my career.
Yeah. Well, look, the book is absolutely packed with stories that people will want to know about. So I don't want to do any more spoilers, but, you know, there's the Ruud van Nistelrooy stuff, the Old Trafford stuff, that rivalry with Manchester United. I just wanted to finish maybe by asking you, just for a quick view on what you're seeing from Arsenal right now. You referenced it earlier, having good people and a good manager and good people at the top of the club in Edu. Is this a team you would have liked to play in? You look at, you know, a partnership like William Saliba and Gabriel and think, oh God, I'd fancy my chances playing with them. You know, the protection that the back four get as well. You know, referencing that 97-98 season where there was that big discussion about how, for example, the midfielders and some of the forward players weren't protecting the back four the way they should have, after which Arsenal would go on this incredible run and win the title and win the double.
You know, it's interesting because now there's sort of there's a flexibility to the defenders, which was more in keeping of my style. So Calafiori, Timber can play centre half, fullback. they're kind of in that mold, I suppose, of what I was. You know, I even played centre midfield for 6 months.
Yeah.
You know, whether you can argue whether I should have done or not, but I was playing in centre midfield. You could see Ben White do that. You know, every one of them. That's the modern day game. More, more. I would say less centre half type, but the two centre halves are, they're tigers, aren't they? And I think essentially what we've got now is like we've got a group of fighters again, and we're in the fight. I don't think. We've had it easy with our away games to have had to start the season, to go to Spurs and to Man City and to Villa and now Newcastle. That's a little run of games I don't think anyone would enjoy, but yet we're still in there. And it kind of, we've had some issues with it, suspensions, but you do, when you're in that borderline of coming into this, you sometimes go below the line and you need to stay above it. Don't get sucked into these sending offs. But that's all part of the learning process. But if I'd sooner have fighters and people that were, maybe 10 years ago, one or two would lie down and they didn't have that fighting spirit and you would question why they were here. These guys look like they're here to make things happen. So I'll take that all day long. We just need a bit more luck and we need a little bit of discipline and we need to keep believing in ourselves because, Newcastle was a tough game this weekend and we need to come away with something.
Well, listen, congratulations on the book. I hope it was an interesting process for you. Well, you mentioned you kept diaries. At one point you mentioned this, you kept diaries. That doesn't seem typical of a professional footballer of the time, which isn't to be critical, but it's certainly an interesting part of how you've come to remember so much in detail.
I probably should have had some photos of that. I had all my fixtures written out, beautifully written. What games I played in, youth team, reserves. I kept writing out, actually. I got less and less as the whole thing became more sort of futile because you don't know if you're going to make it. I kept writing each day, you are good enough. You are good enough.
Like a mantra.
Obviously someone was telling me I wasn't. And I needed to be able to see it written down to believe that I could still make it because it was quite a journey. It was quite a journey. A day didn't go by when they would mention we're not sure if we're going to give you a pro contract. They created a massive jeopardy, but maybe that's the right environment, because it becomes then about winning something, doesn't it? And that follows you around because that must be what's in the ears of the players we got right now. That's what's running through their minds. We want to win something, and it can never leave you. You have to take it around with you each day, and then you only have a rest when the season comes. When it comes to its finish with a trophy in hand or the disappointment of failing.
Well, let's hope it's a trophy at the end of this season for these guys. And thank you again.
It's never really failure, by the way, but if everyone wants to paint it that way, but Arsenal are building towards something. I'm certain of it.
All right. Well, those are wise words from a wise man. Thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Martin Keown.
Pleasure.
Thank you again to Martin Keown, and thank you as well to Penguin Random House for helping to facilitate that interview. The book is called On the Edge. It is out now. You can get it in all good bookshops. Please do try and get it in your local independent bookstore if you can. If they don't have the book in stock, they can order it for you and have it there in a couple of days at most. They would absolutely love to do that for you. They would love your business. They need your business. Keep it local. Support local businesses. And let's not give our money to tax-dodging behemoths who treat their employees like shit. We should all try and do better than that if we can. All right. In the meantime, though, if you would like to win one of 2 signed copies of this book, all you have to do is answer the following question. Against whom did Martin make his final Arsenal appearance? Against whom did Martin make his final Arsenal appearance? All you got to do is send an email to competition@arseblog.com. That is competition@arseblog.com, and we will get all the entries, and the random number generator will pick 2 winners, which I will announce on next week's Arsecast. Right. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Martin. If you like the show, please don't be afraid to leave us a review in your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcasts or the other one, Spotify, all of those. You can leave a review. That will be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much indeed for that. And remember, you can get exclusive bonus content every week by signing up for our Patreon. It's patreon.com/Arseblog. For now, though, thanks again, folks, and we will catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye.